Welcome to Nebraska. Right here's the gist of the entire state. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Nick Geo. What do you think about Nebraska? Did I miss anything? And let me know which state you'd like me to cover next. Okay, yes, there's more to it than that. Let's get at it. Nebraska, abbreviated NE, is found in what we call the Midwest. Its capital city is Lincoln. Its nickname is the Cornhusker State. No way you saw that one coming. And their flag looks like this. Nebraska has 93 counties, basically being a whole bunch of boxes. Its population sits around 2 million as of 2025. There is one U.S. president from Nebraska, that being Gerald Ford, and it was admitted to the Union in March of 1867, making it the 37th state. With that out of the way, let's dive into those borders. So the original settlers that inhabited this area were the Omaha, the Otu, the Pawnee, the Ponca, before they were moved to the Indian Territory that now falls in Oklahoma. Further, the Spanish initially tried to integrate trade with the Native Americans in 1763 when they won the Trans-Mississippi region over France, but that failed and it would become French territory in 1800. Not for too long though, because Nebraska's borders have a similar situation to all the states that came out of the Louisiana Purchase, if you haven't noticed some repetition by now. Like these states, it was originally a territory that extended all the way up to the modern Canadian border from 1854 to 1858, and went from a Missouri River, a boundary it still uses to border Iowa, all the way to the western summit of the Rocky Mountains. This was due to the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. But by 1861, other colonizer territories began to take formation, including the Jefferson Territory. Oh, I've made enough videos where I can use my own videos for research now. Which became the Colorado Territory that year. What else was created in 1861? The Dakota Territory, which gives it the current border with South Dakota. Well, mostly except this tiny piece here, because it wanted to follow the Missouri River. Oh yeah, and by 1863, the Idaho Territory was created, which encompassed part of modern-day Wyoming and Montana, so as you can imagine, the state got smaller and smaller. At least this time it wasn't because of petty wars, probably because everyone was so distracted by a far larger war that you may have heard of. Now, in the 1860s, the US government enacted the Homestead Act, which granted free agricultural land to settlers. And by free, I mean someone else had to pay for it. In fact, a lot of these settlers built their homes out of sod, much like the prior Omaha natives due to the lack of trees. This was also in the days of border equality, which sought to give these new states 4 degrees total, so help them God. And because of Colorado's border, this little chunk was created and it gave a straight line with Kansas. It's no coincidence that folks in the West turned their attention economically to Denver, since they were so mad that the capital moved from Omaha to Lincoln, formerly called Lancaster, because prior to that, folks north of the Platte River didn't like having to cross it. Honestly, looking at this map, it still really doesn't make much sense because, they're not that far apart. I don't know, you really can't please anybody, it seems. Nonetheless, Nebraska falls within this region known as the Corn Belt with these states, thanks to the extremely rich soil. With such arable land, the population would grow enough to reach the 40,000 minimum to opt for statehood. The only changes that really took place after this was the straight line between the Missouri and the Keapaha rivers all the way in 1890, and the renaming of the Western Dakota Territory as Wyoming, and it has been as such since. So on to the physical geography. Wow, this has to be some of the most interesting physical geography you have ever seen. As you've probably figured out by now, much of the land in Nebraska is extremely flat, but quite arable, which is why it falls within the aforementioned Corn Belt and why I seem to be incapable of not making jokes about it.
Anything new with corn?
Oh yeah, corn.
Oh yeah, corn. You bet.
Corn. Yeah.
Corn is always interesting.
The Platte Valley may be one of the most notable parts of the state, which stretches across a large part of it. To the west, vast sand dunes make up what is known as the High Plains, which is where you'll find the state's highest point, Panorama Point. It should be no surprise that this is right by the border with Wyoming and Colorado at 5,424 feet. That's also near the 3-state marker, which is on private property, but you can pay a small fee and sign the book. While there are no mountains, this side is heavily classified by its hills, including the Sand Hills, Pine Ridge, and Wildcat Hills. But these higher plains don't last very long as the elevation slowly goes down the more eastward you go, which is where you'll really start to encounter all that delicious grain. You eventually reach what is known as the Rainwater Basin and the dissected till plains as you reach the basin of the Missouri. Looking at rivers, we already talked about the Platte River being its most important, if not the Missouri. but the South and North Platte come from different arms of the Rocky Mountains, and the Loop and its several tributaries follow from this. What it lacks in rivers, Nebraska can make up for with larger lakes, including Lake McConaughey and the Harlan County Lake. Moving on to highways, I'll bet it's no surprise that there's only one interstate, being I-80, moving from Omaha all the way through the state with a tiny piece of 76 connected to Denver. I do apologize if this seems a little underwhelming, but just know I used 4 sources for all of that info. Some of the states are just a little empty. Don't expect the cities to be much more. And we'll begin with Omaha being Nebraska's largest one. No surprise, but this name comes from one of the native tribes, which means upstream people, and the strategic location of where the Platte and Missouri come together made it an important trade hub historically. Lewis and Clark did indeed make a stop here in 1804, and the fur trader Manuel Lisa established this as an outpost in the War of 1812. Something worth noting about Omaha is that it's to this day one of the largest railroad centers in the US, which makes sense since it saw the end of the terminus of the first transcontinental railroad when completed in 1869. It is home to the Union Pacific Railroad Company, and that leads the state in industry, business, and transportation. The Old Market, as well as the riverfront, are part of what stands out in the city, both playing a large role in modernization, along with the Jean Liais Mall and Heartland of American Fountain. If we owe another thing to its supreme boost in economy, it would be to the role of the Glenn L. Martin Aircraft Assembly Plant around the time of the Second World War, now the site of the U.S. Strategic Command. This is probably because it opened back up only 3 years after the Second World War, once the Cold War began. Omaha has a very rich African-American history, not only because of its several museums around the culture, but it was also the birthplace of Malcolm X and Johnny Rogers. The Charles Schwab Field may intrigue baseball fans, as this is where the College World Series is held every year, and the city is known for its Henry Doorly Zoo and Aquarium. That actually houses the world's largest indoor rainforest, known as the Liad Jungle. Liad Jungle? Liad? I forgot to look up pronunciations for this video. Because of its larger uptake in Latin Americans, it hosts a massive Cinco de Mayo festival every year and a Freedom Festival around Juneteenth. Less common in the US is street food, however Block 16 is known for lots of that, and one of the nation's top sushi restaurants, Yoshitomo, is found in Omaha. Moving on to another city, we'll take a look at Lincoln, Nebraska.
Oh, right. I was just saying to Agent Tweed how I wanted to take a fun-filled vacation to Lincoln, Nebraska.
It's the second largest city and is probably more famous for its trails and nature around the city than the city itself. It's actually named the happiest city in America, and maybe that's because it has a lot of bars and breweries. This includes the 1867 Bar, the Backswing Brewing Company, Boiler Brewing, Corn Coast Brewing, and many others. Further, its parks include the Antelope Park, 48th and Adams Park, American Legion, and the Antelope Valley Trail. This one is actually more of a sports facility running north to south through the downtown area. It's a good spot for gymnastics and track, and it includes the Union Park Plaza that hosts outdoor amphitheater. Haymarket downtown is a pleasing attraction, as well as the Governor's Mansion for the architectural dorks like myself, and same can be said about the Capitol building, being the nation's first vernacular state capitol. It's got a 400-foot dome, can be seen from miles, and was finished in 1932. Other things worth mentioning are the Centennial Mall and the fact that there's a tractor museum named Larson, and it only makes sense that there's a Lincoln Monument considering the city's name. Outside of this, your city experience in Nebraska is quite sparse. Each city almost cuts in half in population as you make your way down the list of larger cities. Grand Island is heavy in horse racing and gambling, having some casinos. Kearney is said to be a great place for camping and canoeing. Fremont, Norfolk, and North Platte come to mind, but honestly, you know what I find even more interesting than these smaller cities? These tiny little ones that you can simply find by scrolling around Google Earth that have population of like less than 100. All across the border with South Dakota, you'll find ones named after people like Cody or Spencer. Napier has a population of 89. Anoka has a population of 10, and actually check this out. Minoe has a population of 1. Elsie Eiler is the lone resident who is the mayor, librarian, clerk, and treasurer. In fact, it looks like you can even check out her library. Now, in terms of historical parks, Nebraska has something called the Agate Fossil Beds, which is full of skeletal remains discovered in the early 1900s of extinct animals. Of course, this should go without saying that you also find the Lewis and Clark Trail in the same vein, and hey, Chimney Rock was an important landmark for pioneers with its spire-like shape from volcanic activity. I must mention the state park known as Smith Falls, which also happens to be the tallest waterfall in the state at 63 feet. Nebraska has a few others, including the Stone Creek Falls and Fort Falls. In terms of caves, there is one called the Indian Cave State Park, which is made out of sandstone, and it also includes a boardwalk and a viewing deck. There's even an entire reconstructed village, and it's named as such since natives were the first residents of this cave. Further, if you look in Lincoln, there's another one called Robbers Cave, which is heavily hand-dug and has private tours one can take. This is actually Lincoln's oldest tourist destination. Some historians say this is where the famous American outlaw Jesse James took refuge from the law. The Elk Creek Carbonite is a unique rock formation that contains a lot of rare earth elements, and this state is home to a fair amount of lowest canyons. Climate-wise, there are very drastic changes between the seasons, however the further west you go, the more arid things get. For much of the year, there are a lot of violent storms as well as tornadoes. In fact, it's pretty much fully encompassed in what's considered Tornado Alley. With all these fields, there's a massive population of white-tailed deer and other basic animals I seem to mention on every episode, and the sandhill crane migrate along the Platte River every year, bringing in millions of them. But there are a few endangered ones as well, such as the gray wolf, black-footed ferret, and the northern long-eared bats. The largest brewery in Nebraska is the Empyrean Brewing Company, based in, you guessed it, Lincoln. Kool-Aid also comes from here, as well as foods like the Reuben sandwich. Some will debate that this came from New York, but I'm going to give it to Nebraska because its story of being invented from late-night hunger pangs during poker at a hotel from throwing scraps together is a lot cooler. They really do have a claim staked in food, since they can also claim the McRib, Eskimo pies, and frozen TV dinners. But the Vice Grip also comes from here, invented by a Danish immigrant. Now, I already mentioned Malcolm X, but some other famous folks from the state include Warren Buffett, Marlon Brando, Larry the Cable Guy, and Boxcar Willie. My grandfather would be so proud of me for that one. Food-wise, don't do it, Nick. Don't make another joke about corn. There's something called the runza. You basically fill a bread pocket with beef, cabbage, and seasonings of your choice, kinda like a Hot Pocket, but without 600 ingredients that probably kill you slowly. Because of Nebraska's beef production, you can get what's called an Omaha steak. Actually, I would say that plays a pretty important part of their economy as a whole. Alright, now I had to mention this, but Nebraska has a thing called Carhenge, which is exactly what you think it is. It is a replica of Stonehenge, but made out of cars. 38 in total, and man, I really just love stuff like this. Culturally, the state obviously has a healthy mix of indigenous traditions. Life is obviously rather slower paced than most states. One of the biggest celebrations in the state is Arbor Day, centered around tree planting, complemented with live entertainment on the last Friday of every April. Some folks in Nebraska may complain that it's pretty much impossible to get anywhere without a car, which is kind of the US as a whole, but yeah, I guess it is probably a little more drastic in a state like that. It also has its economic concerns, especially with property taxes, and some say religious diversity and LGBTQ expression are lacking in this state. Speaking of religion, it's made up very heavily of evangelical and mainline Protestants, with some estimates saying up to 75% of the population identifies this way. In terms of politics, it's very much a red state, only having one Democrat win since World War II, that being Lyndon B. Johnson, and as always, we'll close things out there. For real this time, thank you for coming to check out Nebraska. While it may not be the state that comes to mind when people think of diversity, there's certainly some rich history once you dive in. What do you think of Nebraska? Are you from there, do you live there, or have you ever visited? I'd like to know what you think in the comments, and please tell me which state I should cover next. Cheers!